Yes, sir. I think I am. Can you hear me?
Oh, perfect.
Earth to
Perfect.
Brian. Earth to Brian. Earth to Brian. Come
in. We got you, man. Let's see if we can hang in there for more than 2 minutes. So I guess, Warren, you got some pretty hot stuff to share with the public today, because I've never had a guest who's had this much trouble connecting, especially after they've proven they have a good connection through Skype. But are you on your cell now, or are you on Skype?
I'm on Skype.
You're on Skype. Okay. Well, we're pushing our luck, but let's get it going here. So I asked Warren to come on. Warren, I know Warren through Facebook. We've been buddies for a couple of years, exchanging all sorts of hot topics like geoengineering posts and whatnot. But Warren, I didn't know this, but just a few weeks ago we were chatting, and his dad used to be the what was his position with the George Wallace campaign way back in the 70s?
Right. He was actually the presidential campaign chairman for the Wallace for President campaign from 1968 on up to 1972, and he was actually on the Governor Wallace's gubernatorial staff as his finance director, which was the number one post in the governor's office at that time. It was really Governor George Wallace's number one financial advisor and number one political advisor. And what was
his first name, your dad?
Seymour, Seymore, Trammell, Trammell. You can Google him. He is on Google. I will tell you, about half of that information that Google has is wrong because they don't know. Nobody knows. I'm the only one that knows, besides one of my literary agents, but I'm the only one that knows the real story. So I can tell you that.
That's because he obviously confided in you, right?
I am an only child, and he and I were more like brothers. I was more like a younger brother to him, and we were very, very close, very close. So close that in his latter years, I really took care of him and was his sort of nurse and helper and so forth, and really stayed with him, till the end, and took care of him till the end.
And what year did he die in?
He died in 1985.
Oh, he's been gone 30 years now. Wow.
Well, I'm sorry, 95.
Oh, 95. Yeah. Okay, 20 years.
Yeah.
And so he and when he was he healthy till the end, or did he have some, or was it tough?
No, he was not healthy. He I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but we'll go back. He was injured severely in an assassination attempt. The Richard Nixon, Daddy George Bush assassination team actually tried to kill him first.
Okay, don't go there yet too far yet, because we want to start from the beginning. We don't want to confuse folks.
I said, in that assassination attempt, he was severely injured and barely survived. And so because of those injuries and the medications he had to take later on, he developed Alzheimer's from the medications he was taking. And so, but his mind was still very sharp until just a year or so before he passed away. But he was in generally good health. His mind was until the last year or so from the medications that kept him alive during the last few years of his life.
And you folks, did you live in Alabama then too?
Yes, we have been in Alabama forever.
All right.
Yeah, we were born and raised in Alabama, and we have been here forever, ever since Adam and Eve came through.
That's a long time.
It's a long time.
And also, I was finding out it very interesting. I knew Arizona didn't recognize daylight savings, but I had no idea. Is it the entire state of Alabama or just parts of it?
Well, I think we might be. I think we might be on daylight savings. It's 5:38 here, and so it's. I think we're on daylight savings. We change times. We change times. In a few more months we'll go back to, regular time, and then during the summertime we go into daylight savings time.
So you're not in the Eastern time zone? Or you
No,
what?
no.
Oh.
I am in the Central Time Zone.
Oh, well, that would explain it.
Yeah, they're a bit west of the East Coast there. How many states are you in from the East Coast there, Warren?
Just one.
Yeah.
The only state between us and the Atlantic Ocean is Georgia.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, that makes sense. There are some states that they cut it right in half.
Yes, The time zone here cuts off a little bit of the panhandle of Florida, but then follows the Georgia-Alabama state line all the way up, and then after it leaves Alabama and Georgia, it cuts a couple of states, goes through Tennessee and Kentucky, and on up that way toward the Great Lakes. But everything, west of there is really central time zone.
So you're in the same time zone as Chicago, say?
Correct.
And that's quite far in. That's almost the middle of the country. So it's kind of odd the way it goes.
Yeah, the central time zone begins right there and goes all the way to Texas. We're on the same time as Texas is, in fact.
Wow. Oh, okay.
And then it changes again and again, and we're 2 hours behind California.
That's right.
It's 3:40 in California.
Yeah, she's in Nevada. Is that where you are?
I am. I'm 2 miles from the California border in Lake Tahoe. Yes.
Yeah, you're very close to California.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Wow. This is fascinating. So you wrote a book, yes, or your dad wrote a book, or what's going on?
My father wrote.
Let's start at the beginning of this. Let's start at the beginning. I want to know the whole story. We got for a bit of time here, so let's start at the beginning. How did your dad meet George Wallace?
They were both in the same judicial circuit of southern Alabama. At that particular time in history, they were in the third judicial circuit, and that included the counties of Barber, Bullock, and Dale. That's not going to mean anything to you, but in those three counties, George Wallace was the circuit judge.
And your dad was the judge too?
No, he was an attorney. My father was the DA.
Oh, okay.
Wallace was the judge, and my father was the DA, so they worked very closely together. And they were a little at that time. They were a little separate politically. Wallace was very much liberal at that time, and he ran for governor in 1958 and lost miserably to a gentleman by the name of John Patterson. And it was the vote there during that time was strictly along racial lines, and Wallace being the liberal and John Patterson being the very conservative and a member of the Klan won that election overwhelmingly. So 4 years later, or actually the day after that election in 1958, Wallace came to my father, and I said, Seymour, I want you to be my campaign director. I know why I got bait because of the racial situation. And there were some other terms and things in there that I won't use for radio.
And what year was that?
I'm trying to be politically.
What year was that?
That was in 1958. Governor Wallace, the gubernatorial election was in 1958, and Wallace lost.
When did Wallace ask your dad to be his campaign chair? What year was that? Was that back in 58? I thought it was later.
That was 58. That was 1958. That was the day after the election. The day after the election in 1958. And my father was really not into. He did help John Patterson in his campaign because actually Patterson at that time was the state of Alabama Attorney General. His father was the sheriff of Phoenix City, a city on the far eastern side of Alabama that was very, very corrupt with mobsters, and the mobsters assassinated John Patterson's father. And as Attorney General, Patterson prosecuted all of those gangsters, and my father helped him do that, and also helped him in his gubernatorial campaign. So at that time, My father and Wallace were on opposite sides of the fence politically. My father knew what the right side was to be on to get elected, and that was on the conservative side, or although my father was, neither my father or Wallace were members of the KKK, you had to be associated with the KKK at that time in history to be elected to anything in the South. That seems strange to say that today, but they were all Democrats, and to get elected to anything, you had to be a Democrat, and you had to be in the KKK to be elected to anything in the South.
Wow, that's pretty interesting. So you're saying your dad. So when your dad became campaign chair for George Wallace, did he have to quit his job as a DA?
That's a good question. I was so young, I don't really remember. Probably not. He may have done it sometime. His assistant DA there, Richard Stone, probably took care of all the business for him and allowed my father to stay on the DA payroll, which was, they could do back then. And my father and George Wallace began campaigning for governor for the 1962 election that day in 1958. They spent every day for the next 4 years campaigning for governor. They campaigned for 4 solid years. And so, needless to say that by the time the 62 election came around, and actually at that time in history, the governor could not succeed himself. You had to be governor one term, lay out for 4 years, and run again. Later that changed, but at that time Patterson could not run for governor, and the field was really so weak that my father and Wallace had been campaigning for 4 years, and Wallace flipped his politics 180% and got to be very close with the Klan and all of that particular group, and so they won very handily in 1962, and the rest, as they say, is history.
So he learned how to play the ropes. He learned how to, in 4 years, he learned how to play the game.
Absolutely. And interestingly enough, way behind the scenes, Wallace and my father helped all of the black people in the state of Alabama. They got money for all 3 of the black universities here in the state, and helped a lot of black people here. But they had to all do it all behind the scenes. They didn't hate black people. It was just a political thing. And the black people in Alabama knew that, on TV and to the public, Wallace had to cuss black people. But they knew secretly behind the scenes that Wallace and my father liked black people and helped them. But it was just one of those things they had to keep secret for the sake of politics.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yes.
Interesting. So after Wallace was elected in 62, right? He was elected that year?
Yes.
With the help of your dad?
Yes.
So what happened after that?
Well, they began a really strong campaign of industry building and road building and college building all over the state, and Wallace became very, very popular. He said all the right segregationist things, and cussed the liberals, and started a personal war on the federal government. He and my father started a personal war against anybody who was a president at that time. And at that time, it was John Kennedy.
Do you remember what your father felt about the JFK assassination? It would have been in the same period.
Correct. They just they bought the line that was being promoted. That it was whoever the patsy was.
Oswald.
I can't remember. Oswald. Yeah, they bought the line that was Oswald. Yeah. Interestingly enough, we now know that Richard Nixon, Daddy Bush, and Junior Bush, and Bill Clinton, all 4 were in Dallas that day, and they all knew Kennedy was going to be shot. They all knew it, and so they were there to watch it.
Bill Clinton knew this?
Yes, Bill Clinton knew this, and we have pictures of him there in Dallas that day.
How old was he then, you know?
Oh, they were all kids, yeah. If you look on my Facebook page, you'll see an interesting picture of Bill Clinton, Daddy Bush, and Governor Wallace at a luncheon that was held some years ago, and they were just paddling around. They were all three sitting at the same table, and this was after Wallace was shot. And Wallace was in his wheelchair, but it was a very chummy meeting. It was Governor Wallace, Daddy Bush, and Bill Clinton all sitting there drinking Coca-Cola, all talking, in a very friendly conversation. Yes, they were all there, and they knew what was going on. And I'll give you some more information about that later. But yes, they were all Clinton, Richard Nixon, and both Bushes were in Dallas that day and knew what was going to happen. Everybody knew what was going to happen except John Kennedy.
Wow, that's pretty. Did your dad tell you that, or is that just something you figured?
No, that's what we have found out over the years.
Okay.
Remember, the JFK assassination was a little over 50 years ago, so it took something like 30, 40, 50 years for us to really find out the truth about the JFK assassination, and we are finding it's being true about the Governor Wallace's assassination. It's taken us all this many years to find out the real truth of Governor Wallace's the attempt on his life.
Right.
So when the politician,
let's go to that next. Is that the right timeline to talk about Wallace's assassination, or do you want to talk about Watergate first?
We can talk about the assassination happened first. So on the timeline, the assassination happened first.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay.
Or it's an attempt. It wasn't an assassination. It was an attempt on Wallace's life.
Sometimes I call it an assassination simply because both Governor Wallace and my father died early deaths from the injuries they received in those attempts. So I don't know whether you call it an assassination or an attempted assassination. Had they not been injured in those assassination attempts, they would have lived much longer and much healthier lives. But they died early from those injuries. So I don't know where you draw the line between assassination and attempted. But both men barely survived. Wallace was shot 5 times with very, very soft leaded bullets from the .38 pistol from Arthur Bremer from the front.
What year was that in, Warren? What year was he shot?
1972, May the 15th, 1972.
And was he still in power then, or was he like?
Yes, he was a governor. He was a governor. Absolutely was. He was a governor, and he was giving a presidential campaign speech in Laurel, Maryland. And several of his aides had gotten, death threats and really warned him against going. But he was such a cocky little bantam rooster, and fearless, and fearless that he went anyway.
So he was. How long was he governor? From 62 to 72?
From 62 to really 78. Wow. And up until 82, I think, 1982. From 70, from
20
60,
years?
Just about, yes, because in the interim there, his wife was governor for 2.5 or 3 years. There was one time that he could not run for governor, and so he ran his wife, Lurleen.
And, because in terms of having too many consecutive terms, right?
Right, correct. Correct. So my father was her campaign manager and got her elected.
All right. And so what year did Watergate happen? Was that 72?
That was 72, 73.
Okay.
really it was started about the latter part of 73 and went on into 74 when
let's explain to the audience why you think they wanted to take out Wallace.
Okay, for that we have to go back to 1968. During that, okay,
no problem.
Okay, in 1968 was a presidential election year, and in that particular election, Governor Wallace, my father being his campaign manager, was very high in the polls. At one point he had almost 30% of the vote. Excuse me. He had almost 30% of the vote, and a great number, I forgot the exact number, but a great number of electoral votes at that time. And Nixon, we know today how paranoid Nixon was, and so Nixon was very much afraid of him. And so, but he didn't know, how close it was. But for the 1968 election, if Wallace had won like 2 or 3 more points.
Are we talking the presidential election here, Warren? We want to confuse state and federal politics here, so we're talking presidential, right?
We're talking the presidential race of 1968.
Okay, so you didn't make that clear. So you're saying Wallace ran for president in 68?
In 68, he did.
Against Nixon?
Against Nixon. And
he was a Democrat?
He was an independent.
Oh, okay.
He was running as an independent, and that's important. I'll tell you why. You had 3 top contenders in 1968. You had Nixon as a Republican and Hubert Humphrey as a Democrat.
Okay. Well, let's pick this up after the break. Having a great chat here with my friend Warren Trammell about George Wallace and, those years back then. He's got some really interesting views on things. Welcome back to I'm Nature. Brian Porter, your host here. This week we have a different theme. We're doing some political history, some of the what really happened in the era of the George Wallace, and we left things off with my guest Warren Trammell. We were talking about the presidential primary of way back in 1968. Okay, Warren, why don't we pick it up there?
Okay, that's correct. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Okay. in 1968, you had Richard Nixon as the Republican candidate. You had Hubert Humphrey as a Democratic candidate, and you had George Wallace, who was running on an independent ticket. What really scared everybody was my father being one of Wallace's main financial gurus and put up a lot of money. One of the critical things they wanted to do was to get on the ballot in California, and it took back then it took a little over $250,000, between $250,000 and $300,000, to get on the ballot out there. And back in 1968, that was a lot of money, believe it or not. And my father was able
Still
to.
Still was a lot of money.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. My father was wrangling the money from his personal wealth and credit and the banks and so forth, and spent the necessary money and the necessary personnel and got on the ballot in California. Well, that just scared the life out of Richard Nixon. And it scared the life out of everybody. It scared the life out of the Democrats and Republicans, but particularly Richard Nixon, because Richard Nixon pretty much thought he was going to win. And he thought he could pretty much beat Hubert Humphrey, and he probably could. But except for this upstart Southern brat from Alabama, George Wallace, that was taking votes away from Nixon. And that was killing Nixon. And it got down to the point where there was only 5 or 6 percentage points, maybe 6 or 7 percentage points between Wallace and Nixon. And this just scared the absolute life out of
Who was ahead?
Nixon.
Who was ahead, Warren?
Richard Nixon was barely ahead.
Okay.
Wallace was even ahead of Hubert Humphrey. But the margin between Nixon and Wallace was razor thin. And it was not supposed to be, but it was. And Nixon knew just how close it was. And toward the end of the '68 campaign, they had $3.25 million left in the campaign fund, and my father wanted to spend it on advertising in those 3 states. I think it was Indiana, Michigan, and Iowa. And if they had won those 3 states, the presidential election, nobody would have gotten a plurality of the votes in that election. And therefore, the 1968 presidential campaign would have been thrown into the U.S. House of Representatives. And the U.S. House of Representatives would vote on who the president was. Each representative had 1 vote in that process. And at that particular time in political history, the U.S. House of Representatives was about somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 Democrats. And all of those Democrats would have voted, of course, for Hubert Humphrey.
Exactly.
And so if that election had gone into the House, we would have had Hubert Humphrey as the president in 1968 and not Richard Nixon. So that's just how close history came to having Hubert Humphrey as the president instead of Richard Nixon.
Now, did Humphrey convince Wallace to go in, or do you think he went in on his own accord?
I'm sorry. What do you mean by it went in?
Well, I mean, when it came down to deciding on to run for president back in '68, do you think Humphrey had anything to do with Wallace getting in to weaken Nixon's position?
No, this was an independent decision by Wallace and my father.
Okay.
That was an independent decision. Wallace thought that if he could in 1962, they had gotten enough votes that he was getting enough votes that he proved that he was a vote getter and could gather the electoral votes. And so they after they first won a few states and got some electoral votes, and they went full steam ahead in the campaign. Wallace's message of conservatism, his message of anti-big government, anti-federal government, states' rights, individual rights, that particular thing, as it is today, still popular today, to a great extent, in a little different way. Donald Trump is saying the same things. Ross Perot said the same things. All the independent candidates say the same thing, basically that they're for states' rights, individual rights, and to keep the big brother, the federal government, out of our business. And the people liked it.
Yeah.
People liked it.
Did Wallace actually run for president in '62 as well?
No, he was.
That would have been 60, right? Because it's every 4 years.
So. Actually, in 1962, he made a very, very short run. He ran in like Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, I think Florida maybe, and Tennessee, and he got a small number of electoral votes. But it proved that his message was a good message. So when they got ready for that, when they got ready for the 68 campaign, they went full steam ahead because they knew the message was good.
And what year was the actual? Was that the year that they actually voted for president, or did it come in subsequent years?
Well, there was a presidential election in 1962, and then let's see, there was 68. What's four from 8 is 64. I'm sorry. He ran for president in 1964. It was.
Oh, okay. Usually every 4 years. That's why I got me a bit confused.
I'm sorry, 64, not 62, but 64 is when he made that very short run and got a few electoral votes and proved that his message was good and that he could get. I'm sorry for that noise.
No. So let's get to the point where did Wallace drop out of the '68 presidential campaign at some point?
He did simply because the $3.25 million, that'll stop in a minute. At the end of the '68 campaign, they had that $3.25 million left over. My father wanted to use it in advertising. Wallace's brother, his crooked brother, Gerald, wanted to take that $3.25 million and put it into the Wallace retirement fund. In other words, put it in his pocket. In other words, and so they had a temporary falling out there. My father, Governor Wallace, had a temporary falling out there in 1968 because of his brother, and Richard Nixon just lucked out. He just lucked out because the governor's brother took that $3.25 million and put it in his pocket, and we didn't get to spend it on advertising. So at that point, Wallace's poll numbers went down, and Nixon easily won the '68 campaign. But the election was so close. Really, I mean, very few people realized how close it was. But the election was so close that it scared Richard Nixon absolutely to death. So that was in '68. So 2 years later, Wallace had to run for governor again. He could run. He could run. So in the that particular time was when Wallace could not rerun again from from 58 to 62. Okay. Well, he couldn't run again in '62 because the state laws prevented him. So in '62, they ran his wife, Governor Lurleen, and she was governor for a couple of years, and the lieutenant governor took over for about a year and a half or 2 years. So that brings us really to 1970, and Wallace could run for governor in 1970, and against the lieutenant governor there. Albert Brewer. Well, Nixon, being so afraid of Wallace, sent money down to help Albert Brewer in the governor's race. He sent $400,000 to the Albert Brewer campaign to beat George Wallace, and Albert Brewer came within a cat hair of beating George Wallace. Just a bit like. I don't know, I think it was like 15 or 20,000 votes separated this guy, Albert Brewer, and Governor Wallace. So Wallace got back in as governor by just a very few thousand votes. So here he is in 1968. Wallace scares Nixon. Nixon tries to beat Wallace in 1970. He fails there. And so now he's really worried about Wallace. And so coming up in 1972 presidential election, Nixon was just not going to tolerate this guy anymore. So because we don't have proof of this, but this is just some of the circumstantial speculation. So coming up to the 1972 campaign, this was after Wallace regained the governorship in 1970. Then what we picture is that Nixon picked up the phone and called his assassination team and said, "Okay, guys, I have had it with this guy Seymour Trammell and George Wallace, and both of these guys, we've got to get rid of them. So let's put together a plan to get rid of these guys."
Okay, Warren, we've got somebody trying to call in.
Okay.
If
right.
Area code 617 wants to call back, that would be great.
Yes, area code 617. I saw a call come in, but I wasn't certain if it was for the show. So if you are listening and you want to call back in, that would be great. I will definitely add you to the call.
Yeah,
sure.
Because we do get callers on an occasion. I don't usually ask for them, but hey, if somebody's got a question for you, I'm all for it.
Not a problem.
Okay, let's continue then. Let's continue along with. So we're getting to some of the juicy stuff here, where you believe that Nixon tried to take out Wallace.
Yes, it was he failed to beat Wallace in '68. I mean he didn't fail, but Wallace scared Nixon very badly in '68. Scared him again very badly in 1970. So by '71, Wallace was campaigning again and doing well again. So we picture Richard Nixon picking up the phone. He calls his buddy, Daddy H.W. Bush, and makes him CIA director for a year. And he has brought on G. Gordon Liddy, the consummate assassination and overall bad guy, dirty tricks guy. And he put together the famous plumbers team that went into the Watergate, and we'll get to that. But his assassination team included H.W. Bush and G. Gordon Liddy and his team, and probably I don't think John Mitchell was part of the team, but he knew about it. And Richard Nixon's three innermost cabinet guys, they knew about it. Haldeman, Ehrlichman, and the other guy, the preacher that wrote the Born Again book. Those three guys knew about it. So it was pretty intense around the Nixon camp against George Wallace, and he calls them up and says, "Okay, guys, we got to get rid of these guys. I want you guys to come up with a plan." Well, back in 1962 and 73, 10 years earlier, all those guys were in Dallas and saw how they assassinated John Kennedy. So I said, "Hey, it worked back in 1962 or 63. It'll probably work, in 1971 and 72." And so that's what they immediately began to do. And their little twist on it was they had brainwashed and had this patsy named John Bremer, and his job was to shoot Governor Wallace with a pistol while a sniper at a nearby building was to shoot Wallace in the back. And that's what happened in May of 1972. The governor was at a campaign rally in Laurel, Maryland, right outside Washington, and which suited Nixon because he was close by. And so as Wallace stepped down from the podium and to shake hands, Arthur Bremer walks up to him with a .38 and very soft bullets in the pistol, and that was for a reason, so that they would be so mangled that they couldn't be traced. And we actually, if you look at the videos of that, you can actually see G. Gordon Liddy standing there right beside Arthur Bremer as he shoots the governor. And they knocked the gun out of his hand. And so what G. Gordon Liddy does, he has a throwdown gun. And he puts that throwdown gun down on the ground, and somebody picks it up, and where there are no fingerprints on the gun. And you can clearly see in the picture that Arthur Bremer has that 38 in his hand. So Arthur Bremer's fingerprints should have been on that pistol, but they were not. There were no gunpowder residue on that particular gun.
What happened to Arthur Bremer? Did he get charged and convicted?
He did get charged. He got charged. He got convicted and was sent to prison for, 15, 20 years, and was paroled about 8 or 10 years ago, and he disappeared for a number of years. Nobody knew where he was. And then he showed up in Maryland for a little while, and the rumor was that he showed up in Alabama for a while. But today we don't know where he is. But once he got out of prison, the press did not go to him to interview him, to track him down and find out about him, and to try to find out and interview him, what was going through his mind as he was shooting, going, why did he want to do that? And so he was never interviewed about why he shot the governor. So we still don't have the story from Arthur Bremer himself. We think he's still alive somewhere, but nobody knows where, except the CIA, the FBI. They know where he is. And, the Bush people know where he is, and the Nixon family knows where he is. And I don't know. My personal opinion is that he has a nice, well-fitted pair of cement boots in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean somewhere. But I don't know.
So they didn't think it was kind of odd that Wallace got shot in the back, even though the guy approached him from the front?
Well, nobody knew that. That's the whole deal. Nobody knew he got shot in the back. When Wallace was sent to the Bethesda Medical Center there in Washington, the very first person to come see him was Richard Nixon and his wife, Pat. Nixon and his wife, Pat, were the first people to visit George Wallace to ostensibly to give him condolences and hope that he recovered and all that kind of good stuff. But what Nixon wanted to find out was if he was going to die or not, or at least if he was going to be crippled enough that he would be out of presidential politics. And sure enough, he was. They didn't kill him, but at least Nixon got him out of his politics, his presidential politics, and that was the real goal, is to get my father and Governor Wallace out of politics.
Because he was crippled after that? He was in a wheelchair the rest of his life?
The rest of his life. That, by the way, that sniper bullet stayed in Wallace's spine. The Nixon people got word to him for him to never, ever take that bullet out and have it examined, because they would find out that bullet in his spine did not match the bullets that came out of Arthur Bremer's 38. And it would have proved that the shooting was an assassination attempt instead of just a wild, crazy, idiot, wanting to shoot him for publicity or whatever crazy people shoot people for.
Well, at least there was another shooter involved. That it may have been more complicated than they thought.
Oh yes, it was a sniper from a nearby building, and I don't know if he was aiming for the spine or not, but the bullet happened to hit him in the spine, lodged in his spine, the lower part of his spine, and made him a paraplegic from the waist down.
And you think that, so the bullet stayed there; it never was taken out. And Wallace was aware or not aware of this?
He was aware of that. He was aware. They because they could have taken the bullet out, but the Nixon people told him, "Don't you take it out. If you take it out, and it's exposed that it's a sniper bullet, then that could present some really bad problems for the Nixon family and the Bush family." So Wallace never had the bullet taken out, and he died with the bullet, and the bullet is buried with him in his grave. So Wallace was buried with the bullet still in him.
Well, you still got to prove, just from a bullet, you have to prove that somehow that Nixon was involved. But
well, as the lawyer says, as the DA, as the police say, for a crime to be committed, you have to have motive, means, and opportunity. Nixon certainly had motive. He could certainly create the means, and he obviously set up the opportunity. Arthur Bremer followed Wallace for several months, looking for an opportunity to shoot him, and he apparently was followed by G. Gordon Liddy. And this political speech in Maryland presented the perfect opportunity for Arthur Bremer to shoot him. And G. Gordon Liddy was right there with him. You can see on the videos of that, you can see G. Gordon Liddy standing right there beside Arthur Bremer, if you know what G. Gordon Liddy looks like. And some of the videos, you can even see the sniper bullet in slow motion. You can see a little streak coming from a building towards Wallace. You can see the sniper bullet coming to Wallace and hitting him in the back. You can
now, didn't Liddy fess up to this crime later?
No, never.
He never did?
No,
oh, okay.
Never. Because see, even years after that, me and my literary agent tried for 2 or 3 years to get in touch with G. Gordon Liddy. We figured, well, the statute of limitations has probably run out on it. And G. Gordon Liddy, he had such an ego anyway, he wouldn't mind talking to us about it. But he never returned any of my calls. I had 2 or 3 phone numbers on him. I had 2 or 3 emails on him. And he absolutely refused any contact about it. And my literary agent had a couple of contacts on him, and he never returned a call of any kind to us concerning that. That was just a mom. The Nixon and Bush people had told him not to talk about it, so he didn't. Never did.
Okay.
He never talked to us.
Now, how does this tie in with Watergate?
Okay. Well, Wallace was shot in 1972. Well, 2 years later, by the time 2 years rolls around, rumors are really getting out as to who actually shot Wallace, why was he shot, who might have done it, who might have had reason to shoot Wallace. And as I began to look at it and realize, well, golly, George Wallace was within a cat hair for the 3rd time of making Richard Nixon lose a presidential race. So that gives Nixon plenty of reason, plenty of motive to have Wallace shot. And the rumors were rampant. In fact, some reporters had actually interviewed Wallace and said, "Who do you think had you shot?" And he said, "I don't really know, but I think Richard Nixon had something to do with it."
You're kidding. You said that in public?
Well, he said that. He said that to a couple. He said that to a couple of reporters. He really did.
Was it in the newspapers? Was it printed?
I don't know if it was news. It was on the nightly news once or twice. Maybe just once. It was on the nightly news. But it was.
I don't remember that being actually in the news. But you're saying he said this in confidence to some of these reporters, right? Because we all know the news is censored, and there's only so much you can say about these sorts of things. Yeah. Okay.
So it was leaking out very heavily that Nixon had called this assassination attempt, and today we know how paranoid Nixon was, or is and was. So he began to worry about it, and of course H.W. Bush was very worried about it because he was going to be next in line to be president. So he didn't want his name involved in the shooting, so Nixon had to have an easy way to get out of the president's office without being impeached. There were a lot at that point in history. It was possible, they thought, that a president could be impeached, or at least they could threaten him with it. And Nixon just didn't even want to talk about it. He was so paranoid and so scared, he didn't want to talk about it at all, or have it brought up or anything like that. So he confided in his buddy H.W. Bush.
Didn't Wallace have some? Did he have any friends in the FBI? Who would have investigated for the crime?
No.
Would it have been like the FBI or CIA, or who would have investigated a crime to try to kill a? Would it have been the state? Who would have investigated?
They may have heard some rumors, and we don't know what kind of confidential conversations that Wallace might have had with the Alabama Bureau of Investigation or the CIA, the FBI. We don't know what kind of conversations he had, because at that time my father and Governor Wallace had a falling out on the 19th. After my father was shot, after my father was they tried to assassinate him in an automobile accident. After that, my father survived. then my father Wallace pretty much separated politically, and because both of them were trying to survive physically and financially, and so they separated friendship because they knew. In fact, George Wallace Jr., the governor's son, who he and I were friends for a long time, we finally broke up friendship. But one of the last conversations that George Wallace Jr. Had with me was that he said right now, he said we are still getting those phone calls at 1 and 2 and 3 o'clock at night saying that you and your family had better never say anything about this assassination. If you do, next time we will not miss, and maybe some of your other family members might be involved. So the Wallace family got continual death threats for a number of years after that, until several years after Wallace died, they still got death threats. So my father and Wallace had to separate politically and separate friends to keep either one of them from being attacked again. So the last meeting that my father had with Governor Wallace was at the governor's mansion. And Wallace pulled up his shirt, and he didn't talk about the bullet in the spine. They just assumed, they let people assume that was one of the bullets that Arthur Bremer shot. Wallace probably knew that it was a sniper, but he didn't talk about it.
Okay, Warren, we're coming up to another break here, so
okay.
We'll be back soon, folks, with this very intriguing story from Warren Trammell about the Wallace years and Watergate. We're getting to the Watergate stuff now, folks, so don't forget to come back in a few minutes. Brian Porter and I'm Nick. See you soon after the break. All right, you're back on I Am Nature with Brian Porter. I've got Warren Trammell as my guest right now. We're talking about Watergate. We're talking about George Wallace's attempted assassination. We kind of left it at that. He's just been shot. Wallace is saying, I think Nixon had something to do with this, to some members of the media. And let's pick it up from there, Warren.
Okay, as rumors began to get stronger and stronger, the paranoid Nixon felt he had to get a way out. So again, he goes back to his longtime pal H.W. Bush and says, H.W., I got to get out of this place. Obviously, what kind of plan did we come up with? And that's when they came up with what they called the Alabama Project, and that was a name given by Richard Nixon. He called it the Alabama Project, and the Alabama Project was to get rid of Wallace and to come up with a plan for him to get out of the White House. But it became known as the Watergate because of what they did. So the plan was, instead of Nixon thought it was much better to leave office for some trivial reason, like a bungled third-rate burglary, than it was to be kicked out of office from accusations of trying to assassinate a sitting governor, a man who was governor at the time, a presidential candidate, and his presidential campaign manager. So those are three charges that Richard Nixon really wanted to avoid having on his record, and George Bush didn't want his name on that either. So they came up with the idea of breaking into the Democratic National Headquarters and getting caught. And G. Gordon Liddy, of course, put that plan together very expertly. He was a professional. If they had wanted G. Gordon Liddy to break into Democratic National Headquarters, steal everything they had, record everything they had, G. Gordon Liddy could certainly have done that expertly without ever getting caught. So he had to work pretty hard to screw it up and to get caught. But he was good enough to do that. So he got a bunch of bungling idiots and did some bungling himself and took the rap for it. These guys were the guys that Nixon had around him, Haldeman, Ehrlichman, G. Gordon Liddy, and so forth. They were so loyal, and John Mitchell, by the way, was so loyal to Nixon that they would take the rap for him, and they certainly did. And so G. Gordon Liddy had these guys go in and try to do this burglary at the Watergate hotel there, the Democratic National Headquarters at the Watergate Hotel, and get it bungled and had them caught. And so that began all these special Watergate hearings, and carried out on TV. And it had to be made a very public spectacle to get Watergate on the front page and to get the Wallace shooting on the back page or off the page, not even talked about. They had to destroy the conversation of Governor Wallace being shot and have Nixon and Watergate on the front page. And the media went along with it, and they did an expert job of keeping Nixon and Watergate and G. Gordon Liddy and Haldeman, Ehrlichman, and I think of the other guy's name in there that was the preacher. They kept those three guys on there, and G. Gordon Liddy, in his book about Watergate, was called Will, W-I-L-L, because he had the strongest will of anybody and would not talk to Judge John Sirica. And Judge John Sirica told him in his testimony, said, Mr. Liddy, if you don't talk to us, I'm going to find you in contempt of this Congress and put you in jail for, 5-6 years. And I remember seeing this on TV. G. Gordon Liddy held up his hands, put them together, and said, well, Judge, come put the cuffs on me because I'm ready to go on national TV. And so the Master of Arms there in the Congress came and got Liddy, put the handcuffs on him, and led him out of that meeting. And took him straight to jail. And G. Gordon Liddy spent more time in federal prison than any of the other Watergate people because he would not talk. Sirica told him that if you'll talk, we'll let you out of jail. He said, I'll never talk. And so he stayed in federal prison for somewhere out west, like 5.5 or 6 years. And so that's how what happened to Liddy. And then as the call for impeachment got stronger and stronger, which was all planned and set up, then Nixon got on TV and said he is resigning the presidency, and that was his way out. And everybody knew that he was resigning because of Watergate. Nobody knew that he was resigning because of his attempt to assassinate a governor, a presidential candidate, and his campaign manager. Nobody knew that.
Now, you didn't talk much about what happened to your dad. When did your dad have this serious car accident that you believe was also an assassination?
Wallace was shot on May the 15th of 1972. My father was in an automobile accident 6 months earlier, October the 30th, 1971, approximately 6 months earlier. G. Gordon Liddy thought that if they could kill my father first, that would stop Wallace. Well, it didn't. Wallace was such a gun-ho person, and nobody put it together that if they had known that was an assassination attempt, Wallace might have dropped back. But they just thought that my father had been at a political meeting, he had one or two drinks. He was not a big drinker. In fact, he usually took one drink of scotch, and I nursed him all night long, and he never drank over one or maybe two drinks a night at the most. So what G. Gordon Liddy does, he has somebody put a Mickey in my father's drink, maybe, possibly. But what he really does, he goes out to my father's new Lincoln Mark III and puts a mixture of drugs on the steering wheel. That when you put your hands on your steering wheel, it's a mixture of LSD, and I can tell you about that if you want to, if you got time. LSD on the steering wheel, so when you put your hand on the steering wheel, it absorbs into your skin and goes into your brain in about 60 to 90 seconds and causes you to black out and have an automobile wreck. And so that particular night, in the last of October 1971, that's what happened. My father left the political meeting, came out to his car and went down the road and blacked out and headed into a cement culvert about a half a mile down the road, maybe 80, 90, 100 miles an hour, and just crushed his brand spanking new Lincoln Mark III. And they came in, the ambulance came and picked him up and took him to the hospital where he died on the operating table, and they revived him. But that was the assassination attempt. And people just thought, well, Mr. Trammell went to a political meeting, had one or two drinks too many, was drunk, had an automobile wreck because he had too much to drink. But the doctors were curious because they did an alcohol test on him, and he had practically zero alcohol in his system. And they didn't know how to test for LSD at that time. I didn't suspect it, so I didn't test him for LSD or anything like that.
Did your dad tell you he blacked out? He felt drugged? Is that what your dad reported to you?
Well, he actually, to tell you the truth, before my father passed away, we never found out until later what happened. In G. Gordon Liddy's book, he tells us how it happened. G. Gordon Liddy was going to do the same thing to Jack Anderson. G. Gordon Liddy was told to possibly assassinate Jack Anderson. That's another long story. But to do that, okay,
that's another story.
But to do that, Liddy said he was going to put the LSD mixture and other stuff, special CIA mixture, on Jack Anderson's steering wheel and cause him to have an automobile accident. And that's exactly what happened to my father. They got in the car, put his hands on the wheel, and blacked out. So Liddy, that was kind of a back way of us, Liddy telling us how he caused my father's accident.
No, but Warren, you must have chatted with your dad about what happened, right? What was his personal?
Well, he didn't know. He didn't know the conversation that I had with my father about him blacking out. He actually had no idea why he blacked out. He really had no idea. He never knew. He thought it might have been a war injury because he had a very minor war injury. He had no idea why he blacked out.
But there was no brain aneurysm found or anything like that?
No, there was no evidence at all of any kind to find out why he blacked out. The doctors were curious. They never knew. They found out. If they had known to check for LSD, they could have discovered it. But they didn't. I don't know if they even had a test for LSD back then. Didn't even hardly even know what it was.
But your theory is that Nixon arranged to have this done to your dad.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
See, he didn't want to really kill.
Has anybody said this, written it down, anything, any corroborating evidence to this effect from anybody? You say Liddy? Did Liddy say anything about this in his book?
He didn't name my father, but the way that he described the way that he was going to kill Jack Anderson is exactly what happened to my father. The identical situation is that a person gets in their car, they put their hands on the steering wheel, and 60 to 90 minutes later, they black out, and a car might be trailing them to guide their car as a person slumps over the steering wheel. There might be a car trailing them to kind of guide them into a telephone pole or a tree or a ditch or something to make sure they had a crash bad enough to kill them. And that's in G. Gordon Liddy's book called Will. And so that's exactly what happened to my father. He got in his car. Okay.
So now, how did your dad end up in jail? That's a big part of the story, too.
Okay, so my father recuperated from the automobile accident. And but Nixon, the paranoid Nixon, was still concerned that my father might be still talking to Wallace because they had a couple of phone calls. And so Nixon wanted to make sure that my father and Wallace would be in contact with each other. So Nixon had his IRS group come down to Alabama and investigate the Wallaces and my father and many others, and charged my father with income tax evasion on a large amount of money, $3,000, and had him charged with conspiracy to avoid taxes on $3,000. Can you imagine how big a conspiracy that was? I mean, how big a conspiracy could it be for one person to try to avoid taxes on a measly $3,000? My father could pay that. They got
so many ways to get us nowadays, so many rules, so many regulations. I mean, they got everything they need to throw anybody in jail at any time.
Absolutely. And to be absolutely sure, they went a step further. They found a witness, and they threatened this witness, and the federal judge was on Nixon's side. And this witness was put on the stand to say that he gave my father a swimming pool as a campaign contribution that my father never paid taxes on. And the swimming pool was a $3,000 swimming pool. So that's how they came up with the $3,000. And my father tried to pay the guy the $3,000 for the swimming pool, but the guy never would take the money. He tried numerous occasions to pay for the swimming pool, but he never did. But he never took the money. The guy never took the money. So the IRS had this guy come on the stand and lie on the stand saying that this was a contribution. Mr. Trammell knew it was a contribution, and I told him it was a contribution. And so that's, yes, I did build a swimming pool as a campaign contribution. And so they used that testimony as a $3,000 that my father didn't pay income taxes on. So this guy actually committed perjury in federal court, and the federal judge allowed it. And not only that, but he then instructed the jury at the time that Mr. Trammell was to be charged with conspiracy and that he had to be found guilty. So
no, but Warren, it's odd that somebody who owed $3,000 wasn't given the opportunity to just pay it back. I mean, this is not a huge sum of money.
That's right. The federal judge did not allow it. Richard Nixon, apparently, we guess, another circumstantial assumption, that Richard Nixon told Judge Frank Johnson, who was a known enemy of Wallace, that Richard Nixon told federal judge Frank Johnson that he better find Seymour Trammell guilty and to send him to federal prison. And even back then, federal judges had the power to do that. And the federal judge overruled the jury and sentenced my father to 4 years in prison, and was paroled after 2 years.
Well, what did the jury say? What did the jury say?
They were dumbfounded. They were absolutely dumbfounded.
No, but what did the jury? Did the jury think he should have the opportunity to pay back the money and just walk away?
Sure,
or what?
They did. Sure, they did. They were fixing to turn him loose. They were fixing to turn him loose. Yeah.
I shouldn't laugh, but this is unbelievable. So the jury says, let him pay it back. He made a mistake or whatever.
Sure.
And this judge says, no. We got to put this guy in jail. We got to make it. Oh, I can imagine the excuses he came up with. So the bottom line is, since we're running out of time here, Warren, I can move along here. Your dad goes to jail, and then he writes a book?
While he's in prison for 2 years, he writes a manuscript, The Alabama Project and the Madness in the Magnolia, that describes all of this. And we of course, we didn't have the money and the contacts to get it published. but the number one Southern history professor in the United States, Dr. Dan Carter from Emory University, heard about my father's manuscript and said, "Mr. Trammell, the famous Simon & Schuster has commissioned me to write the story of Nixon and Watergate and all of that, and I know you have the manuscript that tells of it." And he said, "I've written a lot of it. I just want to use your manuscript to verify it." Well, what happened was, after Dan Carter read my father's manuscript, Dr. Carter found out that his writings were totally 100% backwards, and he spent multi-million dollars of Simon & Schuster's money to go into the IRS and dig out the Alabama Project from the super secret files of the IRS, and dig that out of their files, and to verify the existence of this Alabama Project, and then Dr. Carter read my father's manuscript, 325-page manuscript, and the Alabama Project, and found out that my father's story was true and that his story was way off. So Dr. Carter had to trash his book, and it took him another 3.5 years to write the story. And when Simon & Schuster finally saw that, they said, "Well, Mr. Carter, this is a good story, but we cannot have the assassination part in here." So they completely edited out the assassination part of the story. And Dr. Carter told us that Mr. Trammell, you and Warren need to get somebody else to help you publish your story, because you have the real story, the real true story. Simon & Schuster will not let me write the story. They will not publish the assassination story. Well, somebody has to publish the assassination story, because Simon & Schuster will not let me do it. But the book that Dr. Carter wrote is called The Politics of Rage, and you can still get it. The Politics of Rage, and in that book he gives my father most of the credit, mentions his name on many pages, and many references, many quotes, and talks about those Wallace Nixon years. He talks about a little bit of the Alabama Project, but it's enough of a verification that Dr. Carter knows that my father's manuscript is 100% correct, because Dr. Dan Carter spent 3.5 years, and we don't know how many millions of dollars. He didn't give us an exact figure, but he said Simon & Schuster spent multi-millions of dollars to prove that my father's manuscript was correct, and it was, and they found that it was correct, and that's what he based his book on, except for the assassination part, that Simon & Schuster would not let him write. And so the way he wrote the book, wrote the manuscript, I got to be friends with one of the guards at the prison, and the guards let him use a typewriter, and every day he would type out about 15 or 20 pages. So I visited my father every day he was in prison, and every day I would take in a newspaper and would sit at the table with him, and my father would take the 15 or 20 pages he had typed that day, slip it into the newspaper, and I would sneak it out. Now, way back then, it was illegal to do that. Today, prisoners can write memoirs and so forth. Back then, it was illegal, and we were taking a terrible chance, except for the fact that all the guards and all the prisoners out there loved my father, because he gave them all free legal advice. And the guards knew that he wasn't supposed to be out there, that he was not guilty. They knew why he was out there, and so they helped us out and let me sneak out that manuscript, 15 to 20 pages at the time, which took probably 4, 5, 6 months to get it all out, and that was the manuscript. And we were not able to. My father did not write a lot about the Alabama Project while he was in there. We had to wait, because he was afraid to put that in the manuscript, because if they ever caught us and looked at it, we didn't want them to see that part of it. So after he got out of prison, he wrote the part about the Alabama Project, and included that book.
This was sort of like a book your father wrote, right? Pretty much.
It is a manuscript. It's not a book yet. We haven't been published. It is still.
Did your dad want to publish it? Did your dad want to have it published? Did your dad want to have it published?
Absolutely. That was my promise to him as he was dying. He said, "If you don't do anything else, my son, please get this story published." So I'm trying to fulfill my father's last wish to have this manuscript published. It
Wow.
tells the true story of Watergate and why Nixon resigned, why he left the White House, and how the Bushes were involved. W. Bush came down here and was a spy down here in the National Guard. Wallace loved the National Guard, and so they had a lot of meetings, and the National Guard guys were around a lot, so it was real easy for W. Bush, as a kid, 20-something, in his flight uniform to come to those parties and bum around and listen to the conversation and call Daddy Bush back, who reported back to Nixon. So W. Bush made the perfect spy down here, and so that makes W. Bush and his daddy co-conspirators in this plot to assassinate a governor, a presidential candidate, and his campaign manager.
Now, this book, it's been, 25 years now since your dad passed away.
Right.
Have you tried to find a publisher, or what's that story?
Yes, we have been through at least 10 to 15 authors and publishers. It is so controversial that everybody's scared of this, scared of lawsuits from the Nixon family and the Bush family, and maybe even Chico and Liddy, but mostly the Nixon family and the Bush family, that nobody will touch it. We recently made contact with Daniel Ellsberg of the Pentagon Papers. He's interested in publishing it.
Okay, Warren. Wow, this is quite the story. Maybe we'll have you on again to talk more about it. You had to kind of rush it because we started about half an hour late.
I'm sorry.
But no, it may not have been your fault, man.
I know. We can always blame the CIA and the FBI.
Who knows, eh? So anyways, great having you on. It's a very interesting point of view. I mean, it's all, it's your opinion and everything, and you have a right to voice it. That's what this radio station is all about, getting people to voice alternative opinions. So anyways, great having you on. And this is the end of our show today.